Ah, so you're picking some paint colors. I know it can be stressful. Let's all just take a breath. It's gonna be fine. Let's get to it.
What you're going to hear about today is nothing short of a miracle.
Yo, what's cracking, folks? Jeremy Vassar here with Practical Painting, and in this video I'm going over how to select interior paint colors for your trim and your ceilings. Before I get into the nitty-gritty details of this subject, I just wanted to put this video into context. I'm not an interior designer or an interior decorator. I'm a professional painter. The majority of the work that we do is residential interior and exterior painting. So I've walked hundreds of my own clients through this process, so that is my experience with this particular topic. Because I'm the painter actually doing the work, I have a vested interest in my clients liking the colors that they have picked, because if they don't like it, then we have to repaint something which they don't want to pay for, and I don't really want to do work twice. So that has flavored my approach and how I kind of help coach people through this process. Also for this video, I reached out to several local paint stores to see how they walked their own customers through picking out paint colors. What people may not realize is that the people that work at paint stores, whether it's Sherwin-Williams, Benjamin Moore, Lowe's, or Home Depot, have likely walked hundreds of customers through picking paint colors. It happens all the time, so most of those folks have a somewhat of a process dialed in for kind of helping people out. So that is why I reached out to a couple of my buddies that I knew did this quite a bit. And I supplemented my own approach with some of the things they told me and just picked up some good tips and tricks. So the fruit of those conversations will hopefully come through in this video. On that note, I wanted to give a shout out and a thank you to Andrew at Riccardi Brothers, my man Paul at Austin Briggs, and last but certainly not least, Alex, my local Sherwin-Williams manager. I appreciate you guys taking the time to chat, and hopefully I will do your own processes justice in this video that I'm making currently. Alrighty, let's get an easy win and get that ceiling paint color nailed down. If you're painting a typical interior room, you're gonna have three colors you need to pick. One for the ceiling, one for the walls, and one for the trim. Most people's workflow starts with painting the ceiling if you have committed to painting all of the room. And then, so most people do the ceiling first, and then some people like doing the walls and then the trim, or they do it how we do it, which is they do the ceiling, then the trim, and then the walls. It's more of just a personal preference than anything to do with like this is the right way to do it or the wrong way to do it, and your technique is going to adjust based on how you structure your workflow. That being said, almost everybody starts with the ceiling, which is what I would recommend. And if you get the ceiling paint nailed down, at least you can start ripping on the ceilings and then doing your prep out, and at least the job starts moving. Also, ceiling paint tends to be the easiest thing to pick out, which is why I started with it. Now, if you plan on painting multiple rooms in your house or you are headed in that direction, I would highly recommend using the same ceiling paint throughout the entirety of your home. Now, there's one caveat to that, and that is if you're painting a bathroom that has a shower or a bathtub in it, anything that creates a lot of steam, you're going to want to use a moisture and mold rated paint. So from Benjamin Moore, they have their bath and spa paint. Valspar and Behr both have products that are similar to that. You can also use what we use, which is from Sherwin-Williams, and it's their Duration Matte. We really like that paint. It's got moisture and mold block built into it, and just finishes really nicely for us. And if you don't use one of those types of paint, what'll happen is, like say you used a typical flat paint inside of a bathroom that gets really steamy, over time mold will build up on the ceiling. You can also get some drywall issues underneath of that because the drywall is not properly protected, and the drywall tape can give out, and you can get all kinds of problems. I just did a quote on a bathroom where this exact thing happened, and I'm gonna have to fix all of that and then go over top of it with a good bathroom rated paint. So that being said, everywhere else in your house, whether it's your family room, living room, dining room, bedrooms, whatever, you can use the same flat paint all over the place, and it makes your life a lot easier moving forward. So what I would recommend when you are picking out ceiling paint is to go with an untinted white base ceiling paint. What that means is you're basically getting a stock off-the-shelf ceiling paint. Each brand of paint has their own base, but they're almost always they're called like ultra white or white base #1 or extra white, whatever it may be. But if you get from whatever brand, you just say, hey, I want untinted ceiling paint, and they give you a can of it right off the shelf, it makes your life easier for a variety of reasons. 3 particularly. Number one is that you can return any untinted, unopened gallons of stock paint. So say you bought 12 gallons of an off-the-shelf ceiling paint and you only used 8, you could return those unopened 4 gallons back to the store and get your money back, which is really nice and kind of can mitigate some of the worry about overbuying paint. Number two is that the stock formulations for ceiling paint that are just in that base white color tend to cover the best because they optimize that base for whatever that formulation is. So without any tint in it, most of the time that's going to be your best shot at covering well. I always recommend 2 coats regardless, but that's just me. Again, if you stick with a stock ceiling paint, chances are that stock color is going to cover the best of all of the color options you could do most of the time. And thirdly, if you use an untinted stock ceiling paint throughout the entirety of your house, it makes your life way easier moving forward, so future you will be very grateful. So if you have to do touch-ups in the future, say you have some water damage or a leak in your ceiling or something like that, and you need to touch up, you know no matter what room in your house, you've got one ceiling paint that you've used, it's the same color everywhere, and it just makes maintenance and upkeep really, really simple and straightforward, and you're not trying to guess and look at paint labels and see. You just know, like, hey, I've used this paint everywhere, except probably for your bathrooms, like we mentioned earlier. But it just makes upkeep and just the practical application side of things a lot smoother and easier, and we try and simplify that for our clients as well as for ourselves as much as we can. So that is my take on ceiling paint, and now you're going to hear very similar advice about my thoughts on trim paint. Okay, so let's assume you have selected your ceiling paint and you've heeded my advice and gone with a stock white ceiling paint. Now you need a trim paint to complement your choice. And let's talk about trim for a second. When I refer to trim, I'm talking about any of the woodwork in a room. So the baseboard, the crown molding, the chair rail molding, window frames, windows, door frames, doors, all that stuff for the purposes of this video is considered trim. Now most people prefer semi-gloss or gloss paint on their trim, and if you want to know more about sheens, you can check out the video I did a little while ago, and I really explained kind of what sheens go where and why. But most people prefer semi-gloss. That's the trim paint that we use the most often. What I would recommend is going with a stock semi-gloss paint from whatever paint manufacturer you prefer. The same rules apply to this one as it did to the ceiling paint, so you can return any extra gallons you have that have been unopened, which is really nice. Also, touching up's really easy because you've used the same color throughout your entire house. And so if you've got to touch up doors or baseboards or anything like that, you've just made your job a lot easier because you know exactly what paint you used. And also, generally, the untinted bases will cover better even when it comes to trim paint. So those are all things to consider. And again, some people think if they don't select a color, they're almost like copping out on like that they should pick a color for everything. There's nothing wrong with picking a color everywhere. It's just you might be making your life harder than it needs to be in the future. And also from like a trendy perspective, it's very common right now to have the same ceiling paint and the same trim paint everywhere in your house. I've worked behind designers where they've recommended this exact color scheme, and it looks great because what it does is if you have white ceiling and white trim, it frames the walls out nicely so that then you can have a lot of options with the wall color, which is really how the room gets more defined is what color you have on the walls. And you're not limiting your options by selecting anything weird on the ceiling and the trim. And also when people go to repaint rooms or resell their house, if you've already painted the trim and the ceiling white, you may get away with just altering the wall color, which is generally the easiest thing to paint. So just from a practical standpoint, if you go with white ceiling and white trim everywhere in your house, it makes it super easy on you for touching up, for stocking that paint, and then also just it gives you the most options for the walls, which we're going to talk about in the next video. Now you might be saying, Jeremy, that's not good enough. I'm not satisfied with just standard white stock colors on my ceiling and my trim. I want something more, and fair play to you, my friend. So one of the other things that I see is fairly common is selecting the same color on the trim and the ceilings. And I mean that by say you went with, this is fairly common, Alabaster from Sherwin-Williams. It's 7008. Another common color from like Benjamin Moore is like white dove. A lot of people will pick the ceiling paint and the trim paint and they'll put it in the same color white. So that can work out really nicely as well. And again, it does that same thing that I talked about earlier about framing out the wall. One little warning I would give is that it's really common right now to paint cool tone grays. And if you're going to go in that direction on the wall color, I would steer you away from going with any kind of creamy tone on the trim or the ceiling. Those look weird with cool tone grays. It just doesn't look right because of the yellow in the trim paint. So anyway, that's getting a little specific. We'll talk about selecting wall color in the next video. And yeah, so that's my 2 cents from a painter's perspective. Again, it's very, very practical, very straightforward, and I always look at ease of maintenance and ease of care moving forward. And you can make it a lot easier on yourself, again, if you go with stock ceiling paint, stock trim paint. It just makes your life a lot easier moving forward. And again, you're not worried about overbuying paint because you can always return it. So them's my thoughts on that, and I appreciate you guys watching this video. So until next time, y'all take it easy, work smart, and have a good one. Bye.
Fruits of my labor, what I have I built with my own hands.
Amazing.